there is a moment that changes everything, not when you speak louder, not when you fight harder, not when you beg, explain, or try to prove your worth to people who were blind from the beginning. It happens in a colder moment, a quieter one, the moment you turn your back and walk away without a single word. That is when the atmosphere changes. That is when their eyes widen. That is when the game shifts in silence, and everything they thought they understood about you begins to fall apart. Most people spend their whole lives trying to be chosen, trying to be noticed, trying to be heard, trying to be valued. They cling, they chase, they negotiate for crumbs of attention, as if attention itself were oxygen. And the world watches that desperation with quiet contempt. But the one who learns how to leave becomes something else entirely. He becomes difficult to read, difficult to replace, difficult to forget. He becomes the thought that lingers in the back of their mind long after the room is empty. He becomes the question they cannot answer at 3 in the morning. Power has never belonged to those who ask for it. Power belongs to those who can live without it. And when you walk away, you announce something dangerous to the world. You need nothing from anyone. That is when they start chasing. The human mind is wired in a way most people never understand. It does not obsess over what it has easy access to. It obsesses over what it can no longer reach. That is not philosophy. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is the cold design of desire. When you are always present, always available, always ready, you become ordinary. You become familiar in the worst way. You become background noise, something they assume will always be there, something they no longer have to value because they believe it is permanent. But the moment you disappear, something changes inside them. You stop being ordinary. You become absence. You become mystery. You become the missing piece they cannot stop circling in their mind. When you remove yourself from someone's life, you create a vacuum. And the human mind hates a vacuum. It rushes to fill empty space with memory, imagination, regret, and unfinished emotion. They start replaying conversations, rereading your tone, revisiting moments they dismissed when you were still standing in front of them. They begin constructing a version of you in their mind that feels larger, rarer, and more powerful than the version they took for granted in reality. This is not manipulation. It is simply the psychology of absence. Your disappearance forces people to confront your value in a way your presence never could. And the ones who understand this move through life with a kind of quiet force others can feel but cannot explain. Now understand this truth at the deepest level. Your value is not defined by what you are willing to offer. Your value is defined by how difficult you are to obtain. That is the line that separates the powerful from the desperate. You can be intelligent, loyal, capable, and deeply rare. But if you hand all of that away too easily, if you make yourself reachable at every second, if you answer every call to prove devotion, if you rush to every message as though your life has no greater mission, then you have already told the world your time is cheap, and the world will treat you exactly the way you trained it to. History has always shown the same brutal pattern. Men of great talent are discarded while lesser men rise, not because they are better, but because they positioned themselves differently. Scarcity creates value. Accessibility destroys mystique. Anything common becomes easy to overlook. Anything too available becomes easy to disrespect. You must stop seeing yourself as something waiting to be selected. You are not an object on display hoping someone will finally recognize your worth. You are meant to become someone whose energy, time, and attention carry weight. But this only works if it is real. You cannot pretend to be scarce while secretly waiting by the phone. You cannot fake indifference while starving for validation. Your life must become so full, your mission so consuming, your standards so sharp that your attention becomes genuinely rare. When that happens, you no longer need to play games. Your presence speaks for itself, and your absence becomes unforgettable. This is where most men destroy themselves. They mistake pursuit for strength. They believe chasing proves sincerity. They believe persistence will eventually melt resistance. They believe that if they care enough, explain enough, show enough, sacrifice enough, someone will finally see their value. But the truth is colder than that. Pursuit is surrender. The moment you chase, you hand over your power. You place the other person on the throne and reduce yourself to the one asking for scraps. And no one truly respects the person begging for what should be given freely. There is something in human nature that recoils from desperation. The more you chase, the smaller you become in their eyes. The more eager you appear, the more you confirm that your center of gravity is not within yourself. It is in them, in their response, in their approval, in their attention. And once they feel that, the dynamic changes. They do not see devotion, they see dependency. They do not feel admiration, they feel pressure. They do not respect the one who keeps returning after being shown indifference. They start seeing him as controllable, predictable, safe. And safe is the death of tension, the death of respect, the death of power. Now compare that to the man who withdraws. He does not send the long message asking what changed. He does not perform pain in hopes of being rescued. He does not argue for a place in someone's life. He becomes silent, and in that silence he becomes dangerous. Because silence creates questions, and questions create obsession. The man who chases loses everything piece by piece. The man who walks away gains something far greater than attention. He regains command over himself. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. At some point, every man has to decide who he will become. The one who spends his life running after people who hesitate to choose him, or the one who moves so powerfully in his own direction that others feel compelled to follow. There is a weapon more lethal than any argument and more devastating than any emotional confrontation. That weapon is distance, cold, deliberate, calculated distance. Most people do not understand how powerful it is because most people are ruled by reaction. Someone disrespects them and they explode. Someone pulls back and they panic. Someone undervalues them and they work even harder to prove themselves. That is the behavior of a man who still needs the verdict of others to feel secure. But the disciplined mind operates differently. It does not react first. It calculates first. It understands that emotional reactions hand control to the other side. Distance takes it back. When you create distance, you force people to sit alone with what they have done. There is no argument for them to win, no drama for them to feed on, no emotional performance for them to dissect. There is only silence, and silence can become a mirror sharp enough to cut through every illusion. In that silence, their own mind begins turning against them. They start wondering whether they pushed too far, whether they misread you, whether your calm exit meant you knew your worth far more deeply than they expected. You are not punishing them with distance, you are simply refusing to stay where you are not valued. And that refusal carries more weight than 1,000 explanations ever could. The strongest form of distance is not born from bitterness. It is born from self-respect. It is the recognition that your time, attention, and emotional energy are finite resources. It is the understanding that not every battle deserves your voice, and not every person deserves access to your presence. The moment you master that, something changes inside you. You stop begging. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to drag understanding out of people committed to misunderstanding you. You move with quiet control. And that kind of control unsettles people more than anger ever will. Because here is what happens next. Once distance is real, once silence is complete, once your absence settles into the places where your presence used to live, something darker begins to grow in the other person's mind. Not relief, not peace. Obsession. People do not obsess over what they have, they obsess over what they lost. That is the darker truth most men never learn until it is too late. When you walk away, you do not simply leave a person, a place, or a situation. You leave behind a silence that keeps speaking. You plant yourself in their mind like a fort they cannot shut off, a seed that grows in the dark. At first, they will try to convince themselves that none of it matters. They will say you were replaceable. They will tell themselves your absence means nothing. They will act as if the space you once filled can be occupied by anyone. But time has a brutal way of exposing lies. The days pass, the silence stretches, and slowly, without warning, something begins to shift inside them. They start thinking about you at strange hours. A song reminds them of your voice. An empty chair reminds them of your presence. A quiet evening reminds them of the attention you once gave so freely, the attention they can no longer reach. That is the obsession created by absence. You do not beg for space in their mind. You take it through silence. You do not argue your importance. You make them feel it through loss. And that is why walking away is so powerful. When you were always there, they had nothing to fear. But now that you are gone, fear begins to spread through them in ways they never expected. Fear that they misjudged you. Fear that they underestimated what you brought into their life. Fear that they may never again find someone who carried your energy, your presence, your loyalty, your depth. And fear, if left alone long enough, becomes obsession. They start checking on you from a distance. They ask mutual friends how you are doing. They replay old conversations in their mind, listening for clues they missed. They revisit moments they once dismissed as ordinary and suddenly see them differently. They realize that what they took for granted was not ordinary at all. The less access they have, the more their imagination begins to build you into something larger. This is not magic. It is not fantasy. It is the cold architecture of the human mind. You have become the unfinished chapter in their story, the question with no answer, the door that closed before they were ready. And people struggle to live without closure. But now we reach the moment where most men fail. Not at the beginning. Not when they first decide to leave. They fail when the power has already started shifting in their favor. They walk away. They create distance. They feel the silence doing its work. And then, in a weak moment, they destroy everything. They go back. They see one message, and their heart starts racing. They hear a small whisper of interest, and suddenly they come running. They get the slightest sign of attention, and they collapse back into old patterns as if nothing ever changed. That is where they lose. Because they never truly left in the first place. Their body walked away, but their mind stayed chained to the outcome. Their feet moved, but their spirit remained on its knees. This is the mistake most men make. They treat walking away like a trick instead of a transformation. They use silence as a strategy to get attention, not as a real expression of self-respect. And the moment the other person senses that, all the power evaporates. You no longer look strong. You look predictable. You look desperate. You look like a man pretending to have standards while secretly hoping to be called back. Half measures always expose weakness. If you walk away, you must be prepared to never return. That is the standard. Not because you are bitter. Not because you are cold for the sake of ego. But because the walk means nothing if your soul is still waiting at the door. Real departure happens inside first. It happens when you reach a point where their response no longer controls your emotions. It happens when you stop checking your phone every few minutes, when you stop stalking their life from a distance, when you stop hoping they will finally validate what should have been obvious from the start. Most men cannot do this because they are addicted to the outcome. They are not addicted to the person. They are addicted to being chosen, addicted to being wanted, addicted to hearing the world say, "Yes, you matter." That addiction keeps them weak. That addiction keeps them available. That addiction keeps them trapped in games they should have outgrown long ago. But the truly powerful man walks away with no expectation. He does not leave to provoke a reaction. He does not disappear as a performance. He simply continues. He keeps building his life, his discipline, his mission, his future. If someone returns, he does not melt. He evaluates. If they do not return, he has lost nothing that was meant to define him, because he was never dependent on them in the first place. That is the difference between the amateur and the master. The amateur plays games. The master has moved beyond the game entirely. Burn that into your mind. Walking away means nothing if you are still mentally kneeling. The exit must be complete. The severance must be real. Only then do you begin to taste a level of power most men never reach. And that power has a name. Untouchable. Not arrogant. Not cruel. Not numb. Untouchable. So grounded in your own standards, your own discipline, your own internal order, that nothing outside you can shake your foundation. This is the level every man claims to want, but very few are willing to build. Because becoming untouchable requires more than clever tactics. It requires a complete reconstruction of identity. Most men build themselves on external approval. Their mood rises when others praise them. Their confidence collapses when others pull away. Their emotional state is not their own. It is a puppet hanging from strings they handed to the world. One compliment can inflate them. One rejection can destroy them. That is not strength. That is dependence dressed up as confidence. The untouchable man cuts those strings. He understands a truth that changes everything. His value does not come from how others treat him. His value comes from the standard he refuses to betray within himself. When you reach that level, rejection still stings, but it no longer defines you. Loss still hurts, but it does not break your structure. Someone leaves and you wish them well as you continue moving forward. Someone disrespects you and you remove them without hatred. Someone fails to recognize your worth and you understand that their blindness does not reduce your value. This is what it means to build an internal kingdom. Everything outside you can shift. People can change. Alliances can collapse. Validation can disappear overnight. But the man who has built himself from the inside can lose everything external and still remain standing. Because his power was never borrowed to begin with. It belonged to him. It was forged through restraint, through discipline, through solitude, through standards, through every moment he chose not to betray himself for temporary comfort. Becoming untouchable is not the absence of emotion. It is mastery over emotion. It is feeling the pain and refusing to be ruled by it. It is wanting connection without needing it so badly that you abandon your dignity to keep it. It is knowing how to care without surrendering your center. It is choosing self-respect over access, silence over pleading, direction over emotional chaos. And when a man reaches that level, people feel it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. They treat him differently. They respect him without being told. They move carefully around him because they sense that he cannot be pressured, bought, rushed, or emotionally handled like everyone else. They sense that you are operating from a place they cannot control. And that mystery unsettles them. That composure unsettles them. That total independence from their approval makes you unforgettable. At that point, you are no longer playing the game. You have become the game. And once you reach that state, there is no going back. You will never again beg for what you can build within yourself. You will never again lower your standards just to avoid being alone. You will never again confuse access with love, attention with respect, or pursuit with power. And then, eventually, the moment comes. Not when you are waiting for it. Not when you are checking for signs. Not when you still crave their validation. It comes only after you have truly released the need for it. Only after you have stopped performing strength and actually become strong. Only after your silence is no longer a tactic, but a fact. Only after your absence is real. That is when they realize your worth. And it does not arrive gently. It hits them like a train in the middle of the night. At first, they told themselves they could live without you. They convinced themselves you were easy to replace. They framed your absence as relief. They pretended they had lost nothing. Maybe they even felt powerful for a while, thinking they had won by letting you go. But reality is merciless with people who lie to themselves. Days pass, then weeks, then months, and little by little, the truth begins leaking through the cracks. They start noticing what is missing. No one listens to them the way you did. No one challenges them the way you did. No one brings the same presence, the same intensity, the same gravity, the same depth. The people around them may be louder, easier, softer, more available, but none of them feel like you. And in that emptiness, your ghost gets louder. That is where regret begins. First as a whisper, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I pushed too far. Maybe I let go of something I was never supposed to lose. But whispers do not stay. Whispers for long. Not when silence keeps feeding them. Not when memory keeps sharpening your image. Not when distance keeps turning your absence into proof. That whisper becomes noise. That noise becomes obsession. They begin watching you from afar. Quietly. Indirectly. They ask about you without saying your name too often. They search for signs of where you are, what you are doing, how far you have gone without them. And what they find burns them. They see you building. They see you rising. They see you becoming the man they never believed you could become. And that is the part that stings the most, because they had access to you when your loyalty was still being offered freely. They had a place in your life when your energy was still close enough to touch. They were sitting at the table and did not know the value of the seat. They took your presence as if it were permanent. They treated your depth as if it were ordinary. And now the table is full. Your life is moving. Your standards are higher. And their chair is gone. That is not revenge. That is consequence. People almost never understand value while they still possess it. They only understand it after loss has done its work. Loss is the teacher they never wanted, but it is the one that tells the truth with brutal precision. Your absence becomes the mirror that forces them to face everything they dismissed, ignored, and underestimated. But this is where your discipline is tested. Not when they leave. Not when the silence begins. Not when the loneliness hits. Your power is tested when they come back. And many of them will. They return when they feel the distance. They return when your absence starts cutting deeper than your presence ever did. They return when they realize the version of you they lost cannot be replicated. They return when they sense that you have changed, and they are no longer dealing with the same man they once had easy access to. And in that moment, you must remain cold. Not cruel, not bitter. Cold in the sense of clear. Controlled, unmoved by the sudden warmth of people who only learned your value after losing your access. You must not abandon everything you built just because they finally see what was always there. The version of you they ignored is gone. The version of you that waited, chased, explained, and tolerated less than he deserved is dead. What stands in his place now is different, stronger, calmer, harder to reach, harder to confuse, harder to manipulate. You do not melt because they return. You do not rush because they finally notice. You do not throw away your standards just because regret has made them emotional. You evaluate with logic. You observe with discipline. You ask one question and one question only. Do they deserve access to the man you have become? And if the answer is no, then you close the door without guilt. That is gross. That is self-respect. That is what it means to leave and truly mean it. Because the man who walks away and never looks back becomes immune to control. He cannot be bought with delayed validation. He cannot be ruled by guilt. He cannot be trapped by nostalgia. He cannot be dragged back into old patterns by the same hands that once undervalued him. Their realization of your worth is not the reward. Your reward is the man you became while they were too blind to see it. That is the real victory. Not that they miss you, not that they regret losing you, not that they finally chase you. The real victory is that you no longer need any of it. And that brings us to the final law. Walk away and never look back. This is not a suggestion. It is not a clever move to use when circumstances become uncomfortable. It is not a performance designed to trigger a reaction. It is a code, a standard, a way of life. It is the unshakable commitment to your own path, regardless of who decides to walk beside you. The world will test this constantly. People will mistake your patience for weakness. They will interpret your kindness as desperation. They will test your boundaries just to see how much they can take before you break. They will push, delay, withdraw, disrespect, and manipulate, all to see whether you are one more man who can be bent by fear, guilt, loneliness, or need. And in those moments, you will have a choice. Stay and negotiate for the respect that should have been given freely, or turn, walk, and never look back. The man who masters this law becomes untouchable because he cannot be manipulated. Threats mean nothing to him because he is always willing to leave. Guilt means nothing to him because he knows his worth is not decided by those who fail to recognize it. Even the fear of being alone loses its grip because he has learned something most men spend their whole lives avoiding. Solitude is not punishment. Solitude is where strength is forged. When you walk away without looking back, you declare something to the world without speaking. You declare that your self-respect is not negotiable. You declare that your standards are not for sale. You declare that you would rather stand alone in your power than kneel in the company of those who diminish you. And life responds to that. People feel the weight of your absence. They replay the moment you left. They wonder how you found the strength to do what they could never do. They ask themselves why they were not enough to make you stay. But you are no longer there to answer. You are already ahead, building, becoming, moving. This is what waits for you if you truly commit to this law. Not revenge, not bitterness, not emotional numbness. Freedom, complete freedom. The freedom to choose who deserves your presence. The freedom to remove yourself from anything that poisons your peace. The freedom to stop clinging to outcomes that were never meant to define you. The freedom to understand that no single person, no single opportunity, no single rejection, no single loss has the authority to decide your value. You are the source. That is what changes everything. And once a man becomes the source of his own power, that power cannot be taken from him because it was never given by anyone else in the first place. So carry this with you, not as a line from a video, not as a temporary mood, as a code. The next time someone undervalues you, do not argue, do not explain, do not beg, do not fight for a seat where your presence was treated like something cheap. Remember who you are becoming and walk. If this message stirred something in you, let that not remain a private feeling. Write this in the comments. I walk alone. I rise alone. I win alone. Let those words mark the death of the version of you that used to chase what did not choose him. And if this message spoke to something real inside you, subscribe and stay close to this channel. There is more ahead, and it is built for men who refuse to beg, refuse to be broken, and refuse to be forgotten. This is your moment. Now walk and never look back.